Can you imagine a very famous 50-something-year-old evangelist walking through a dormitory collecting shoes? Do you have that picture in your mind? It's one of my very favorite and humbling stories of Dwight Lyman Moody, D.L. Moody, who grew up, spent most of his life around the Chicago area. You may not know that he left school in the 5th grade. He did not have more than a 5th grade formal education, D.L. Moody. And he moved to Boston and began working as a shoe salesman and went to a revival at about the age of 18 and trusted in Jesus and then began to follow him. He was involved in so many things, involved in prayer, starting prayer movements and mission movements and churches, the Moody Church in Chicago, where he was even during the Great Fire, Chicago Fire of 1871. He and the church ministered to all of the residents of Chicago in that time. He was a powerhouse evangelist, the most popular and godly, just the best dude, evangelist in America during the time. Even so famous that he went over to England for a few years and was a part of the revivals that were going over in England. Then he came back. It was in the late 1800s. He was probably in his early 60s. He had enough clout and experience and sort of renown. People were coming to him that he would hold Northfield Bible conferences in and around Chicago. And there was a particular one, it may have been the first one, Northfield Bible Conference, that a whole bunch of folks from England and Europe came over, a bunch of pastors. And they had their first night, and they all were sleeping in rooms in this dormitory. And Dr. Moody, people called him doctor, he wasn't a doctor, Dwight Moody, D.L. Moody, walked to the end to his dormitory late that evening and noticed something that was quite embarrassing. Every door where a European pastor was, he had his shoes outside of the door in the hallway. And D.L. Moody's face dropped because he realized, something was lost in communication. In Europe, but not in America, in Europe, it's customary when you go to a conference like this to put your shoes out, and there would be a dedicated team of servants that came each night and cleaned and polished your shoes. It was just a thing. He did not arrange that at the Northfield Bible Conference. And so he had a problem. He could either sort of embarrass his European friends when they opened the door in the morning and realized, nobody polished and cleaned my shoes, and I'm embarrassed that I put them out there. He didn't want to do that. And so he went and talked to some of the other people that were working for him and said, hey, would anybody want to help me out? And they sort of said, nah, we were busy with other things. And so late in the evening, we would not even know this story except for an accident. Late in the evening, D.L. Moody goes by and carefully collects each shoe, noting which room that it came from, taking him back to his room, and spent all night washing and polishing the shoes and then replacing them one by one. It was only discovered by accident because one of his helpers and assistants knocked on his door early in the morning, and he was still working on the shoes, and they asked, what are you doing? And he sheepishly replied and asked him not to tell anybody. The word got out many, many years later, and it's one of my favorite stories, perhaps the most famous Christian in the late 1800s in America, as big or bigger than Billy Graham was in our time. Here's D.L. Moody in the middle of the night, trying not to let anybody know, and he would be very embarrassed, probably was embarrassed when people started talking about it, doing something very, very, very humble. Yes? Humble. That's just a small picture of what we'll see today in the Gospel of John. So if you've got your Bibles, we'll be in the Gospel of John, chapter 13. We've turned the corner now. In this text, and from now on, in Jesus' ministry in the Gospel of John, he is no longer speaking to the crowds. He speaks to no more crowds at all. All of his words from this point on, and we've got a good chunk of the Bible, the gospel left, All of his words from now on are to 12 disciples or 11 disciples, or to Caiaphas and the people at his house, to Herod or to Pilate, or to a small group of people at the cross, or to the disciples after the resurrection. That's it. He doesn't speak to the crowds anymore. His public ministry is over. He gave his parting shot at the end of chapter 12, which was really a rehearsal of many of his words. But now he focuses on the 12. And I say 12 because there's one of them that takes the spotlight in this text. And it's the one who will leave first. There is one Judas, son of Iscariot. There are two Judases, there are two Simons, there are two Jameses of the 12 disciples. So if you ever get on a game show and they ask you, name the 12 disciples of Jesus, you just get two Judases, two Simons, and two James. You got halfway there. You're good, okay? One of the Judases is Judas, the son of Iscariot. And whenever he's mentioned, he's always mentioned as the one who betrayed Jesus, the traitor. And he takes the spotlight in our text today. And so it's a poignant moment because up until now, for the first 12 chapters of the Gospel of John, Jesus does something and then explains it, right? He does something and then explains it. Either explains it to the crowd or explains it to his disciples. Now it's switched. Now he's going to spend some of the most beautiful chapters in all of our New Testament, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 of John. There's nothing like it anywhere else. Some of the most beautiful chapters in all of our New Testament explaining to the disciples what's about to happen, and then it happens. So he flips it. He doesn't do something, then explain it. Now he's explaining it before he does it. And we get a chance to look in. John chapter 13, unbelievable. As we read this text, you'll notice this is, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, called the Last Supper. But if you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the first three Gospels, often called the Synoptic Gospels, they have a very different version of what we're going to read here. They have Jesus holding the bread up and saying, "This is my body," holding the cup up, saying, "This is my blood," doing all of this explanation and then sharing. We even have some conversations among the disciples. They're arguing during the Passover, by the way, who among them is the greatest? Pretty awkward for all the group. And Jesus has to call them to task and then teach them. And then they move from there to the Garden of Gethsemane. There's no long conversation. In John, he is intentionally saying to us, hey, you have Matthew, Mark, and Luke, read them. I'm going to tell you what they didn't tell you. I'm going to fill in the gaps for you. Because Jesus washed our feet on that night. They didn't tell you about it. I'm going to tell you about it. He also had this incredibly beautiful conversation with us. And I'm going to write it all down for you. They didn't include it. I will. And so John has this unique perspective. He really rushes from the day when Jesus enters into Jerusalem on that first Sunday, the triumphal entry. He has a couple of details on that day, then rushes through the week to get us to Passover, which probably happened on Thursday that year. He doesn't have any of the details of Jesus going in and turning over the temple tables the second time, cursing the fig tree, having the conversations with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they're trying to trap him, and he's teaching the people in the temple. Matthew, Mark, and Luke have all of that detail. John says, no, I'm going to tell you about when he came in, because it's important. Then I'm going to rush to the Passover, because I'm going to tell you some things that they didn't tell you. So we get a really unique perspective in John. And all of his words are incredible. We're going to read actually 30 verses, but we'll read the first 17 just now. Look at John chapter 13, the first 17 verses. This is what John says. Now, before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing his hour had come, that he would depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, the devil, having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come forth from God and was going back to God, got up from the supper, laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, he girded himself. Then he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. So he came to Simon Peter, and he said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered and said to him, what I do you do not realize now, but you will understand thereafter. Peter said to him, never shall you wash my feet. And Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, then wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head. And Jesus said to him, he who has bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew the one who was betraying him. For this reason he said, not all of you are clean. Verse 12, so when he had washed their feet and taken his garments and reclined at the table, again he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, so I am. If I then, the Lord and the teacher, washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I gave you an example that you should do as I did to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who is sent greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. Anybody notice, show of hands, some stars on the text on the screen? By words, anybody? I left those there on purpose because those are noting a change in tense. We do this when we tell stories. And John is doing it right now, and I wanted you to see the verbs on the screen with the little stars. What he's doing is he's describing something that happened in the past, but he's telling it like it happened right now in the present. We do this all the time, right? We're like, yeah, back in college, I was doing this thing, and my roommate there, and he says this. We say that he says this, not he said, and he says this, and then I say that, and then he says this, and then I say that, and then this is what we do. We tell it in the present tense, even though it happened long ago, because it draws you in. You get to see the action and live it, and that's how John is telling the story. He does it throughout, not all the way through, but he tells the story intentionally to draw you in. And he tells it with what we call in Greek the historical present. He's using the present tense to describe a past event because he draws you in. It's beautiful. Now, there's some things that I want you to see. 3 words that we're going to focus on. Know, love, and serve. You saw these in the text. Know, love, and serve. Jesus is doing this. But I want to set the context here, okay? Because the very first verse, now before the feast of Passover. We take that to mean before the actual meal was over or before the actual meal got to the main part of the meal. It's not before the day of Passover. He's probably talking about before we get to the actual meal or before we finish the meal, this all happens. Now, we have to remember what happens before the Passover. I'll put a little sketch, it's my work, so I apologize, of a door up here, okay? And so you can see that, just a door, because if you go to Jerusalem today, and some of you, Lord willing, will come with me in February, we'll go, and Lord willing, we'll do that and make it available to Grace House every couple of years. That's our plan, Lord willing. And so we'll go at the beginning of 2026, and then hopefully we'll go again at the beginning of 2028. It's a lot, and so it's hard for me to do every year, but every other year is our general plan, Lord willing. But if you go to the Mount Zion, the lower part of Jerusalem today, you can go to the upper room. And whether or not it was the actual upper room where Jesus celebrated this meal with his disciples is debated, but it's very, very ancient. It's in the right location, which gives it a pretty high rating. We can't be perfectly 100% sure, but for centuries, it has been recognized as the room where Jesus met with his disciples for the Last Supper, still called the upper room. It's pretty incredible. It has a door on it that probably looks a little bit like that. I've walked through it many, many times, okay? And so what's interesting about this is not the way the door looked when Jesus met with his disciples, right? There's something missing, isn't there? What's missing? Well, the blood is missing. And so they met in a door that looked like that, right? Because here's what happens before we get to this text. Judas goes off to make preparations. We'll talk about that in a second. And then Luke tells us that Peter and John went off to make preparations for the meal. And so Peter and John go off and purchase a sacrificial lamb with the throng of people doing that, they take it up to the temple where it is slaughtered and flayed and prepared to be roasted. They take it back probably on a stick between their shoulders, and one of them is carrying a bowl of the blood of the lamb. And as they go in to prepare this house, they take some hyssop and from that blood and paint it on the lintel and the doorpost of the door, because that's how they celebrated and remembered Passover. They still did it. And so this is what the door would have looked like, leading into the upper room where Jesus did this. It's important to understand, right? This gives some context. A lamb's blood is ceremonially put. Now, the spirit of death is not passing over them like it did in the first Passover of Exodus, but we're remembering this and praying as we celebrate it for God's fuller redemption of his people. The Exodus was a beautiful event, the most remembered event of the Old Testament, but it's meant to shine light and give us hope for the greater redemption that the Messiah is going to bring, not just from slavery in Egypt, but from slavery to sin and death. And so this is what the door looked like. If you were to walk through the door, you probably would have come to a table that looked like this. It's very simple, but it's very, very low. Okay? This is meant to be sort of 3 dimensions. It's going back into the darkness there. And if we were to sketch very rudimentarily a guy laying there, we probably would do something like this. And so they're laying on cushions, their head towards the table, typically on their left shoulder into the cushion. And they're reaching into the table with their right hand. All of this is really, really important, okay? They're reaching into the table with their right hand. And so there is a person in front of them, and that typically is below them. And there's a person behind them, which means above them. And wherever the host of the meal is, there are 2 places of honor. The highest place of honor is behind, above the host. That would be to his left. And then the second place of honor would be below the host to his right. We know the people who are in these spots. We can recreate it after what John tells us. And it's very, very surprising. Incredibly surprising. So I want you to see this door in your mind. I want you to see this table. It's got candles on it, all of the ceremonial food, the lamb and the bitter herbs and the salt water and the haroset and the matzah bread and all the other stuff that was there. And this is a very long meal, recalling all that God did to free his people from Egypt. All of this is important because Jesus is doing this right now. The blood on the doorpost is a picture of what he's going to shed in just a few hours, right? And the Exodus that they're remembering, he is working in this very moment as the greater Moses, leading his people into greater redemption. All of this is happening and the disciples don't see it. I want you to see it because John helps us see. You got it? Now we'll go back to the text. Verse 1. Now before the feast of Passover, Jesus knowing, there's our first word. Jesus knows a couple of things here. Do you see it in the text? Jesus knowing that his hour had come, and that he would depart out of this world to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil already having put in the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, and he had come forth from God and was going back to God, did this thing. Jesus knew. The first word is know, and John writes this to us to make and help us understand that this is not chaos taking over. Chaos is not ruling in this story. It's going to look like it because there's all kinds of terrible things happening. Judas unleashes this into the story. But chaos is not king. Jesus knew all of this stuff. He knew it, he predicted it, and he began to tell his disciples that it was going to happen. Jesus' knowing, very emphatic in the Greek text, is very important to understand. If you don't see Jesus knew this, then you're like, wow, Jesus got caught off guard. He's on his heels. His life was taken from him. But no, he'll say it later. My life was not taken from me. I laid it down willingly. I know and knew all of these things were coming. And I've told my disciples so that they would know that I know. This is really, really important. The second thing is love. Verse 1, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Jesus, the word know, and the second word love. This is all out of love. And he's going to end this context at the middle of chapter 13, or end today talking about love. And he's going to talk about love for the next few chapters. Love is really, really important. And this was all about love. And the last thing, of course, is to serve. He knows, he loves, and he serves. And this is really, really important, okay? As we get into this context, because we're going to slow down here and talk about the washing, it's important to know that John is giving us these lenses of meaning. He's giving us lenses of meaning that we see through, and so we can see and understand the words and the actions of Jesus. The whole book, as we've been saying from the very beginning, is the book of signs. He gives us these signs. The first of them, or the turning the water into wine, he manifested his glory and his disciples believed in him. Then he would heal, then he would do this, he would do that. The second sign, and these signs begin to accumulate. Signs are one of the lenses that we're supposed to see Jesus through. He's doing incredible things. He's saying incredible words. The raising of Lazarus, so far, one's bigger that's coming, the greatest sign. Now the foot washing is a huge lens. We're supposed to see through this lens to the next thing that happens, the cross. The cross is going to be very, very difficult for the disciples to understand. He does something here and now to help them understand what the cross is all about. And it's the foot washing. The foot washing is a lens through which they're supposed to see the cross and what happens after that. It's going to help them understand the meaning and the purpose of it all, okay? He knows, he loves them, so he moves from love into service. Now let's look at this because it's amazing. We already saw the devil having put into the heart of Jesus in a little bit. As we finish our text, we're going to see Satan actually enter into Judas. Which tells us a lot about what's going on with him. We'll talk about him in a second. But look at verse 4. He got up from the supper, laid aside his garments, taking a towel, he girded himself. Now, so he would have taken off his robe and just his inner tunic would have been on. Then he would have taken a very, very long towel and tied it around so it had a lot of extra fabric in front of him that he could use to work with. This was the uniform of a slave, not just a servant, but a slave. Now, here's what you need to know about this. It was so shocking to the disciples that the first couple of people that Jesus washes his feet clearly don't say anything. We have to get to Peter, and we expect it from Peter, our bro, okay? We have to get to Peter for him to start saying, can we talk about this for just a second? Because this was powerfully difficult for them to understand. You have to go into the rabbis and read the Talmud and other things, but what you find there about this is that slaves were the only ones who ever did this kind of menial work. It was low work to wash the feet of another. What's even more is if a Hebrew was a slave, because you could get into in slavery in debt and all these other things in the Old Testament, if there was a Hebrew that was one of your slaves, they didn't have to do it. Because of their heritage to Abraham, they were not allowed to stoop to the level of washing someone else's feet. It was that low. And so here's Jesus girding himself, kneeling down. Again, if you can see the table, the feet extending away from the table, walking around the edge of the table one by one, washing the disciples' feet. Now, let me ask you a question. If Jesus would have said to the disciples or to you, hey, I want you to wash my feet, you think that would have been easy for them to understand and accept? Heck yeah, I'm in. If Jesus is there and I'm at the table and he's like, hey guys, I want to teach you something and give you guys an opportunity to wash my feet. I'd have been the first one. Okay, let's do it. Where's the water? Let's go, okay? A little harder would have been Jesus saying, hey, I want you to wash each other's feet. I'd be like, oh, okay, all right. I'm not going to maybe be the first one to jump up with that, but I'll go along. This is Jesus teaching. I'm going to do that. But Jesus washing my feet It's a totally different thing. Totally different thing. Not only the stark level of humility that comes with that in Jesus, but also in me is wild to understand. Now, maybe awkward personal information. I don't like feet, okay? I don't really trust people who do like feet, to be honest with you. And so, but I don't like feet, and I keep good care of my feet. My feet look good, by the way, because I don't like them, and I don't want people to look at me and like, they got fugly feet or whatever. It's like, oh, it's ugly feet. I don't like that. And so when I was courting and falling in love with Liza, first time I think we took her home to my family, she was sitting on the couch. My mom, who knows me, and my dad, who knows me. Now, she's a ballerina. I think she has beautiful feet. She doesn't like her feet because they've seen a lot of miles in hard shoes, okay? And so she's laying on the couch in my parents' house, and I've just introduced her, and I am rubbing her feet in my lap. And my mom is looking at me with these wide eyes. And I'm like, what's wrong, Mom? She's, I'll talk about it later. And so Liza goes to bed in her bedroom, and I'm still talking with Mom before. And she goes, you are in love. And I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, you were rubbing that girl's feet. That's not what you do. You have to be in love. And I was like, I think I am, And so I love her feet. Nobody else's, just hers, okay? And so can you imagine, though, Jesus kneeling down and saying, hey, take off your socks and shoes. What if one of the leaders of our church, what if one of the worship leaders or I said, hey, we're going to do this now, one by one. It's going to take a long time, but I'm going to get a bowl, and I'm just going to come down the aisle. Would any of you be like, I'm going to try to make it out of here really fast? I would. There's something awkward about that, right? There's something difficult about that. And that's the point that Jesus was trying to tell them. That's the point. And that's why Peter speaks up. Look back at the text, verse 5. Then he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. So we don't exactly know where Peter is on the table. We know that he's not close to John or Jesus. So he may be on the other end. He may be the last, probably not the last, if Jesus maybe started around this end of the table and began to work. Maybe the other Judas was there. Maybe James, the brother of John, was there. Maybe Peter comes third. And he gets to the other Judas, and this Judas is like speechless. I don't even know what to say. And then he gets to James, and James is the same. I don't even know what to say. Then he gets to Peter, and Peter objects. Verse 6. So he came to Simon Peter, and Peter says to him, you see the star? So he comes to Simon Peter, and he says, this is all bringing us in. All of these stars are meant to be read as the present tense. So he comes to Simon Peter, and he says to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Which really weird in Greek is he puts the two pronouns right up front. He says, Lord, you my feet do you wash? Because that's the point of it. He's like, you, me doing this? No. This is below you. This is nearly heresy. This is so strange that you would be doing this. Never, right? Jesus answered him, said, what I do you don't realize now, but you'll understand later. And Peter says to him, never shall you wash my feet. And it's even more emphatic in the Greek. It's ume, which is like never, ever, ever. Unto the ages, he says. Like never, ever, ever, forever will you do this. Super emphatic. And then Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. And then again, we can say typical Peter, but we probably would have said the same thing. Peter says to him, Lord, then not only my feet, but also my hands and my head as well. I want you to have all of me. I want to have all of you. And so if there's a barrier between you having me having you, and this, then to wash it all. And Jesus responds, Jesus says to him, no, he who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but he's completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew the one who was betraying him for the reason he said, not all of you. So here's the big interpretive question. We can solve this, then we can work on applying it, which is even better. The big interpretive question is, what is clean? What is bathed? What is washing? What is he talking about? Well, we'll start from what we know in the text. Not all of you are clean. And he says not all of you are clean because of Judas. So now let's talk about Judas for a second. Judas helps us unlock this. John chapter 6, Jesus says about Judas, there are many disciples who do not believe in me. Then he begins to speak about Judas, who was a devil from the beginning. He says, didn't I choose you, the 12, and yet one of you is a devil? That seems to me, and most people who read it, very clear testimony that Judas, although he was a follower of Jesus, never had faith in Jesus. Now, here's where it gets really dangerous, because that's still possible today. You can be a follower of Jesus and not have faith in Jesus. You can serve in the manner of Jesus and yet serve with the wrong heart and motives, not the heart of God, not the heart of Jesus. Because remember, what did Judas do in the years that he followed Jesus? He did everything all the disciples did. He went off in the 2x2 missions. He was a part of this and a part of that. He collected the food when Jesus multiplied the fish and the bread. He was all a part of everything. He was there the whole time. And yet so we don't misunderstand and think that Judas was a believer and then lost his salvation. Jesus tells us very, very clearly, no, Judas never believed, and I chose him anyway. So, not all of you are clean. If he's talking about Judas there, then clean seems to mean, in my opinion, very clearly from the text, that he has a relationship with me by faith. He does not. He's not clean. But all of you are clean. He says it again in chapter 15. All of you are clean except that one. So if you're clean and bathed, then what does the washing of the feet mean? And what's this no part of me? If I don't wash you, you have no part with me. The best explanation that I come up with that makes sense of the text, and the scholars seem to agree, is this is an invitation to fellowship. If you have a relationship with God, that is secure. I think Jesus and Paul and everybody teaches you can't lose that salvation. You're secure in the hand of God. No one can take you out of my hand. No one can pluck you out of my Father's hand. You're adopted. You transfer over into the kingdom of light from the kingdom of darkness. You're baptized into the faith. All of these beautiful, beautiful pictures that can't be undone. Your name is written in the book of life, and God's pencil doesn't have an eraser. He never takes that back. But we're still wrapped in flesh and sin, and so how do we maintain intimacy of that relationship? Well, we focus on fellowship. We focus on repenting and confessing and moving towards God and pursuing Him. Even though we are a son and daughter, we can, fall away from intimacy with our Father. I think what Jesus is saying as a picture is this washing of the feet is an invitation to stay intimate with me. It's an invitation for intimacy. And so unless I do this, you and I are not going to have a great intimacy. And Peter says, then wash all of me. He goes, it's not necessary because you already have a relationship. You're already clean. I'm doing this to show you something. So now we'll get to application. There is at least 3 levels that this applies to. One, it applies immediately to the Passover, because if you celebrated the Passover with us in April, you know that at least twice in the meal, we have a ceremonial washing of our hands. I think what Jesus did during this is when he was the host supposed to wash his hands, this is the moment where he stood up and said, I'm going to increase the meaning. I'm going to ratchet up and notch up what I'm teaching you in the Passover Seder, and it's going to blow your mind. And so he takes off his robe, wraps the towel, and instead of washing his own hands as the leader, he humbles himself and becomes the slave in the room and washes the feet of others. So I think it had an immediate application to Passover. 2, he obviously has a theological meaning to it. where he's talking about clean and bathed and washing, and at least some of this goes to relationship with Jesus by faith and intimacy by repentance, all these things. But I think the most important thing is the very practical, exemplary level that he's talking about. You don't understand this now, but you will later. And now I've done to you something that you should do also. It's interesting, I read recently some of these sociological studies that college students and grad students do. Some of them sound really silly to me, but I think what happens when we talk about this or that and we read these random surveys in scholarly journals or just newspaper articles, whatever it is, you're like, why would anybody do a survey on that, right? I think these are sociology grad students and stuff trying to figure out how to do specific studies and come to conclusions which are probably more complex than I understand them to be. One of the surveys I read was the most meaningful words to a typical American. They did a survey. I asked a bunch of Americans, thousands of them, what are the most meaningful words that someone could say to you? Very simple question, right? You probably know the first one. I love you. First ones, those words mean more and are more important to most Americans than any other words. I love you. Second, what do you think? The second was I forgive you. I'm like, oh, cool, very expected. Okay, third blew my mind. Third most important words to the typical American. Supper's ready. Supper's ready, truly. I love you, I forgive you, supper's ready. That's how it came out. Now think about that and the gospel. Think about that and this night with Jesus. I love you, I forgive you, come and sit with me at a meal. This is the gospel. It speaks to the deepest needs of the typical person walking on the street. I love you, I forgive you, now sit with me. This is intimacy. It's an invitation to intimacy. Yes, immediate Passover, yes, theological, but it's practical, it's exemplary. Now here's where the difficulty comes. Look back at the text, not all of you are clean. Verse 12. So when he washed their feet, taken his garments and reclined back at the table, he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for I am. If I then, the Lord and the teacher, washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I gave you an example that you should do as I did to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who sent greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. Okay? There's not an easy way for you to explain around Jesus, their master, taking the position of a slave and getting on his knees slowly, washing the feet of 12 people. 12 people, not 11. 12, including Judas. He washed the feet of Judas. And we know that in the text because Judas is still there. We'll read that in just a second. He washed the feet of Judas. And we're about to see where Judas is reclining at the table in the next part of the text. It's going to shock you. He washed the feet of Judas. And then he says to everyone, if I, your Lord and teacher, do this, what prevents you from doing it? Every man at the table knows, okay, nothing. I must do this. If he's doing it, then I must. If I'm really a disciple of him, the master, then I must do this. And the question is, with you, how does that sit on you? And of course, you're maybe thinking of very practical, like, I don't know if I've ever taken a bowl around to anyone and said, can you remove your shoes, please? This is going to be awkward for you and me, okay? No, I mean, we can do that literally. I was moved to do that on our wedding night for Liza. We came home and was taking off her shoes from her wedding dress, and I had it all prepared there, and we had this moment together. It's the only time that I've done that in that way. We did some things in a student ministry mission trip where we washed one another's feet, and I can tell you, washing someone you don't know well, super awkward. And it was even more awkward for them. And so, yeah, we can go around practically and do that, but how do we serve in a menial way at the lowest possible. That's what Jesus is saying, right? There is no level too low for you to stoop to serve someone else, to serve one another. And I don't know how that sits with you, but some of us, I think, struggle. If you're like me, at times you're struggling and like, hey, I'm above that. I would rather not. I'd rather not take out the trash. I'd rather not do that. I'd rather not mop the bathroom. We have somebody else to do this. Like I have a degree, you know what I mean? Like I'm an old man, I own a car, right? I don't have to mop bathrooms anymore. No, Jesus is saying, well, if it's necessary, how does that sit? How does that sit with you? It can be very, very difficult, but it's really, really important. The big idea is this, and then we'll get back to Jesus and then apply it. The big idea is important. In order to serve like Jesus, one must first be served by Jesus. This is important to understand. This is what Jesus is saying. If you want to serve like me, if you want to love like me, if you want to wash the feet of others like me, he's saying to Peter, you must first allow me to do that to you. There's gospel in this statement. There's intimacy in this statement. There's discipleship in this statement. This will prevent you from being a Judas, because Judas never really believed. Yes, his feet were washed, but he did not serve in the same heart of Jesus. He followed him technically, but he never believed in him. And if you follow Jesus, pay attention. If you follow Jesus without faith in Jesus, that will inevitably lead to legalism in your life. And it will fall and crumble around you. If you try to serve like Jesus without the heart of Jesus, that will lead to arrogance and pride. And you will become the most important person in the room, and your life will crumble around you. God, through his son Jesus, in this moment is saying to his disciples and to us, here's how you protect yourself from arrogance and legalism. Allow me to wash your feet, and then you go and do the same. If you want to serve like Jesus, you must first be served by Jesus in the gospel. You must first allow him to go to the cross and die for you, and then give you his grace and righteousness. And then in that, and only in that, can you begin to love and wash and serve others like Jesus did. You can't do it any other way. If you do it any other way, the great, great danger is ending up like Judas. Now let's finish the text. Verse 18, I do not speak of all of you. I know the ones I have chosen, but it is through the scripture may be fulfilled. He who eats my bread and lifted up his heel against me. He who eats my bread has lifted up his heel against me. From now on, I'm going to tell you before it comes to pass, that when it does occur, you believe that I am. Not I am he, I think in the text, it's that I am, the name of God in Exodus 3. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who receives whoever I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. He's talking about his disciples there, who receives whoever I send. When Jesus had said this, he became troubled in his spirit. I want you to see him sitting or leaning around the table, and testified and said, truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me. The disciples began looking at one another at a loss to know of which one he was speaking. There was reclining on Jesus' bosom one of the disciples whom Jesus loved. That means the guy who is in front of Jesus leaning back on Jesus' chest, right? You remember? They're all laying on their left shoulder. And there's a person laying in front of Jesus here. You can see the back of him. So he leans back and talks to Jesus like this. And if he leans far enough, his head is probably on Jesus' chest. This is the disciple whom Jesus loves. This is John talking of himself. The first time he uses that phrase, and uses it from now on in the rest of his letters. So the one at the second place of honor is John, right in front of Jesus. There was reclining in Jesus' bosom one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. So Simon Peter gestured to John. He's across the table. And he says to him, tell us who it is of whom he's speaking. So he says, ask Jesus who he's talking about. And he, leaning back thus on Jesus' bosom, said to him, Lord, who is it? And then Jesus answered him. Probably there's some conversation going on, and Jesus is just talking to John. He says, this is the one for whom I shall dip the morsel and give it to him. This is a specific part of the meal. So when he had dipped the morsel, he took it and gave it to Judas. How does he take it and give it to anybody at the table? Where's Judas sitting? Where's Judas leaning? Judas is leaning right here. Judas is at the place of honor at the table. The highest place of honor, except for the host. It's the only way that Jesus can take the sop and give it to someone. Judas is right behind, above him. And I have to believe that that's intentional. I have to believe that Judas was placed there by Jesus. Because Jesus said, I love them until the end. What is he saying? He's saying to Judas, you still have an opportunity. You still have an opportunity to not do what the devil has prompted you to do. You still can choose a different way. And it was true. He has him in the place of honor. He dipped the morsel, gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. And after the morsel, he chose. And the devil entered him. Satan then entered into him. And then Jesus said to him, because he's the only person, again, besides John, that he can speak directly to, what you do, do quickly. Now, none of those others reclining at the table knew for what purpose he had said this to him. For some were supposing because Judas had the money box that Jesus was saying to him, buy the things that we have need for the feast, or else he should give something to the poor. So after receiving the morsel, he went out immediately, and it was night. That last statement is pretty important though, right? Light and dark in John is very important. He sets the whole scene at night, and then he tells us, because the Passover meal would have happened at night, sets the whole scene and says, hey, do what you must do quickly. Satan enters him, even though the devil had already put it in his heart in verse 1, and now he leaves and goes out. Now, here's the crazy thing. What he seems to do is make good on what we see in Luke 22. Let's look at Luke 22 on the screen. It's one of the last slides. This is a couple of days before this. Now, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, called the Passover, was approaching. The chief priests and scribes were seeking how they might put Jesus to death, but they were afraid of the people. And Satan entered into Judas. This is from the Gospel of Luke, who was called Iscariot, belonging to the number of the 12. And he went away and discussed with the chief priests and officers how he might betray Jesus to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money, so he consented and began seeking a good opportunity to betray him apart from the crowd. So here's what I think happened. Judas leaves and goes to the court of Caiaphas and says, okay, I know where he is. You guys get your party together. Come, I'll take you. And so they're okay. Maybe it takes half an hour, I don't know. And he goes and begins to take them back to the upper room. And when he gets to the upper room, there's nobody there. Because at the end of John 15, Jesus, knowing what is happening, says, get up, let us go from here. So they leave the room and go to the Garden of Gethsemane. And so why does Judas take the group to the Garden of Gethsemane? Because he knew that's where Jesus goes. So he probably comes back to the upper room first, and there ain't anybody there, and he goes, oh, I know where they went. And they go and meet him at the Garden of Gethsemane. But we have chapters of beautiful information and context and conversation before them. Judas, the Benedict Arnold of the Bible, right? Who dies an ignoble death by suicide later on, not ever a believer, but yet Jesus chose him and gave him a place of honor. This is loving. Jesus loved this man who he knew would betray him to the very end. And he did it anyway. Again, Jesus is not chaos taking over. His life wasn't taken to him, but he laid his life down. So how do we live out this text? The great danger in this is that we either take Peter to the extreme or we take Judas to the extreme, right? Peter's like, no, I don't need this. And Jesus is like, no, you really do. You really do. You're already clean. You already have a relationship with me. But it's important to maintain that relationship with me. And Judas, whose feet were washed, but his heart was never changed. Who followed, but he never believed. My opinion on Judas is when Jesus chose him, he comes and says, okay, let's do this. Let's follow this guy. I think he slowly came to the conclusion, as many of them did, this guy may be the Messiah. But when Jesus began talking, as he did regularly, about going to a cross and dying, Judas says, wait a second. Wait a second. Why did they give him the money box? Well, probably because he had gifts of administration. The New Testament calls that the gift of government, administration, helps, these kinds of things. I wonder if Judas was looking at the larger scheme and saying, a Messiah who goes to a cross and dies is not the Messiah that I want, not the Messiah that our nation needs, not the one that I'm expecting. And so at some point, I think he defects and crosses the line and says, let's get rid of this guy. He is not the one for us. I don't know exactly, but Jesus says from the beginning, I chose him, yet he was a devil. In John 6, he didn't believe. In John 12, he was a thief and stole things from the money box. And now we see the devil put it in his heart, and then Satan entered him. This is powerful words, powerful words. But back to the washing of the disciples' feet. In order to serve like Jesus, one must first be served by Jesus. I'll show you a statue of Jesus washing Peter's feet. This is on the campus of Dallas Seminary. There's many statues like this everywhere. My favorite professor at Dallas Seminary, his name is Charlie Bayless. He's with the Lord now. Taught me so much about the scriptures. And I just sort of followed him around and took every class. He told me this story. He said, I had a missionary friend came to visit Dallas, and I was giving him a tour of the campus, and we came to this statue, Dr. Charles Bayless and a missionary friend. And the missionary friend stops here and says, wow, how amazing. And Charles goes, let me get into the picture. And the guy was like, what? What do you think Dr. Charles Bayless did? I'll tell you, he did not kneel down by Jesus. He sat with Peter and put his foot in the bowl. And the missionary said, get off of there. What are you doing? And Dr. Bayless says, that's the point, brother. That's the point. Unless you're willing to humble yourself as Jesus did to Peter and put your foot in the bowl and allow Jesus to do that, you will never fully understand what he did for us and how we're supposed to live it out. It's the craziest, strangest, most humbling thing. I still remember that every time I see pictures of this. I don't think I could do it, to be honest with you. I think I would have trouble walking up to the thing and sitting with Peter and putting my foot in the bowl. But in order to serve, this is Jesus' own words changed for our purposes. In order to serve like Jesus, we must first be served by Jesus. We first must be loved by him, forgiven by him, and dine with him. In order for us to go and truly love and serve and bless others. That's the way he does it. That's the way he does it. I want to pray for you, and then we're going to celebrate the Lord's Supper together as a church. Father, we bless you.